Another week, another set of contenders and pretenders rankings. Saturday is come and gone, and who stands out in the SEC heading into week 4 of the college football season? Let's not waste any time. Welcome on into SEC Unfiltered. It's Cole Thompson here. Make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification down below, and smash that subscribe button because we're talking college football, and this is your #1 source for all things SEC. Download the podcast version of the show. Make sure that you're following us on the social channels. Make sure that you're following me on Twitter. That way we can have a back and forth conversation at Mr. Cole Thompson. And to check out all of our great work, make sure that you visit secunfiltered.com. This episode is brought to you by RHOBACK. Look good, feel good this upcoming fall on game days with RHOBACK.com by using the promo code SECU for 20% off your first purchase. Joggers, polos, hoodies, shorts, much, much more. You want to be dressed the nine on game days, make sure that you visit RHOBACK.com. So I feel like I have to send out a PSA every single week whenever I do this segment. This list is interchangeable. It will be flexible throughout the season. Just because you're in the pretender category today doesn't mean you won't shoot up to the contender category in 3 weeks. Just because you're currently stable in the contender category doesn't mean I won't knock you down to the wait and see. So now that we have heard that PSA, and I'm not going to see comments saying, how dare you say that this team is not here? Let's talk about it. Kentucky, sorry to do this to you. You're the first pretender. I think that your offense is what it is at this point. You got to be able to have a second grounding element besides Brock Vandergrift and Sumo Karmbe. I think getting Chip Trayanum back might be beneficial, but I don't trust the passing attack. I think that also your defense has played up to a certain standard. Maybe there is just a kryptonite whenever you have to face off against Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks. But overall, your defense is going to keep you interesting. Your offense is going to keep you from scoring points. And I just feel like that when you decided to punt, that was the waving of the white flag in 2024. You still have a rigorous schedule ahead. I don't know if Brock Vandergrift and the Bush-Handem relationship is going to work out. You may not be a 10-win team this year. Hate to break it to you, but you would have to win out to go ahead and garner that interest. Arkansas, congratulations. You won a football game over UAB at home. Why was it close? Why? Generally, why? The defensive secondary has been abysmal the last 2 weeks against Oklahoma State and UAB. The passing attack, I'm going to say what most people have already agreed with. Taylon Green is kind of going underrated right now because of the way that he has to continue to make plays behind the line of scrimmage. And just because you have, for my money, the best running back in the SEC at this point, isn't enough for me to save you. The writing is on the wall that things are not going well in Hog City. I just don't think that you're going to see Sam Pittman pull this one out. He kind of feels like bacon bits at this point. Go ahead and play the season. Taylon Green, Jaquindon Jackson, I'm going to be paying attention to you. Andrew Armstrong, still going to be paying attention to you. But it's kind of like seeing a couple of Corvettes mixed in with a junkyard at this point. Auburn, hey Auburn, you got a quarterback. It's very clear that Hank Brown gives you an opportunity. 4 touchdowns in the game against New Mexico. But why was this thing close at half? Like, honestly, why was this thing very close going into halftime? Only about a 7-point spread. You came alive in the second half. Jarquez Hunter had 152 rushing yards. The problem is that this defense still is blanketed with problems across the board. 448 total yards allowed to New Mexico. Oh, and by the way, you still have to play several explosive offenses this year, like potentially an Oklahoma that's getting healthy at the right time, like potentially Alabama in the Iron Bowl, like potentially Texas A&M, depending on what they do with Marcel Reed and Connor Wigman. So I just think that right now, I agree with everything that I've heard from what you see when it comes to Hugh Freeze. Yes, you did need to go out and add in a transfer portal quarterback, but at the same time, you are still multiple pieces away from being a contender. That being said, maybe you get to enter the next category that we're going to add in once this list gets a little bit longer, the spoiler role. Certainly you're not going to be in the college football playoff. If you get a win this week, maybe I'll bump you up to wait and see, but it just feels like, again, there's far too many questions when it comes to the offensive line, the secondary, the pass rush. Didn't need a quarterback because you knew you weren't doing much this year. Mississippi State, hi. You have decided to firmly plant yourself as a long-term stay in the pretenders category. But why is that? Well, I said at the start of the year, I would be very shocked if this Mississippi State team would do anything at all. And I got flack. I got told by everybody that this was going to be a year where Jeff Lebby brings the offense to life and they're going to win in shootout fashion and you don't know anything about football. My favorite line, you don't know ball. You don't know ball. And then you proceed to lose 41-17 in Toledo. I don't care that it's Toledo. I don't care that they're the pride of the MAC. You don't lose at home to a MAC squad. Sorry, you are now a permanent resident in the pretenders category. Vanderbilt, hate to do this to you, buddy. You can't lose at Turner Field to Georgia State, which, by the way, just feels like the apocalypse for these lower tier SEC teams, and expect me to go ahead and give you grace. Diego Pavia, I love you. You will always be the starting quarterback of the Thompson Tech Red Wolves. The NIL brands that we have for you are second to none, and you were able to at least make this thing interesting down the stretch. But you made it interesting down the stretch against a Sunbelt squad in their backyard. You got to go play against Missouri this upcoming weekend. You have to go play against teams like South Carolina with a great defense. You got to go play against other opposing rosters such as Tennessee late in the year. So I'm telling you, I like where this team is. I like the fact that maybe you're going to see them keep things at least interesting in the SEC. But it just feels like that right now, if you were trying to go ahead and get bowl eligible, it's not going to happen with the way the roster played. But the good news is that you probably are at least going to be hitting the over when it comes to the win total. Florida, there was no life on offense. There was no life on defense. Your offensive line is basically a turnstile that's going to get both Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway killed. The run game has been anemic outside of a few explosive plays. Trey Wilson, he's going to be out for this game. I would not be shocked if he doesn't play the rest of the year, depending on what the status is of Billy Napier. And the writing is on the wall. Florida needs to get back to the no-nonsense, we mean business kind of arrogant mantra that made them an icon when Steve Spurrier was there, when Urban Meyer was there. Anybody who says, we need to go hire a next up-and-coming rising star. Yeah, well, that's what got you in this place to begin with. You don't need to have that quiet confidence. You need to have that confident arrogance that comes out in the swamp. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know when Billy Napier is going to be shown the door. I think it's very clear that his time is up. The explosive plays allowed at Texas A&M in the backyard were so baffling that I have people still telling me that this was a close game. It wasn't. It was never close. It was never in jeopardy. Texas A&M kind of took their foot off the gas. You scored a couple of garbage touchdowns late in the fourth quarter. Congratulations. The stat lines will tell you the truth. The score will lie to you. This is going to be the drunkest game, I think, of all this weekend against Mississippi State. But lo and behold, don't know what else to say. At this point, the writing is on the wall. Best of luck to you, Billy Napier, in your future endeavors. Best of luck to you, whatever happens at Florida. Now let's move into the wait and see category. And I'm starting off with this team because I have a lot of questions, and I almost want to put them in pretender, but I feel like right now I got to put them at least in wait and see. Texas A&M. Texas A&M's offense came to life in the swamp, a place that is quote-unquote hostile environment. So was that hostile for Marcel Reed? Looked the part of QB1, seemed to fit like a glove inside of the offense that Colin Klein wants to run. If I'm putting them in pretender category, it's because Connor Wigman is the starter. I think that there are three truths to every scenario. The first is Marcel Reed is a damn good quarterback that fits a brand of offense that can work down in College Station. The second one is you also have a really good quarterback in Connor Wigman who just is not the ideal fit for what you have and what Colin Klein wants to do with the mobile quarterbacks, with the RPO, with the option attack. And number three, Florida's defense is just crap. It's just all of that combined can be true. If you want to be in the wait and see category, Marcel Reed, I think, has to be your starter. The defense is coming along strong. You're watching as a guy like Cyrus Allen is kind of taking control as that number one receiver. You have a quality number two in Noah Thomas. Le'Veon Moss is making plays as a running back. He's got that physical approach. The offensive line is getting better. You're seeing a cohesive balance on both sides of the ball. If you have Connor Wigman as your starter, I'm sorry. I just feel like you're going to be in the pretender category. This week against Bowling Green, if you get a healthy Wigman, I expect both to play. By next week, you have to decide what is going to be the plan moving forward. And here's the bottom line, Texas A&M. If you decide to move on to Marcel Reed, it is the Marcel Reed show. We're not going to do this back and forth like we see Sunbelt Billy do last week, where it's a rotating course of quarterbacks. Nope. You got to stick with one. If you stick with one, I think you're in good hands. South Carolina, here's the deal. Their defense is going to keep them in games. If I'm going to take away anything besides the fact that it was an egregious penalty on the Nicky Manwari touchdown, the defense is legit. It is one of the best in the SEC. There have been only two teams that at this point have drastically impressed me when it comes to their defensive performances. And surprisingly enough, they're both nicknamed USC because the other one with Danton Lynn has been phenomenal. But their defense is going to be keeping them in games. Dylan Stewart, that is the best recruit that has come through that building since Jadeveon Clowney, future number one overall pick for my money. Kyle Kennard, worth every penny when you look at the way that he pass rushes coming on in from Georgia Tech. The linebacking core is great. The safeties have been phenomenal. I think that when you look at Jalen Kilgore, he's great in the nickel. Cornerback play, a little susceptible. You got to be able to have a healthy Lenore Sellers. I think if Lenore Sellers plays in that game last week, you walk away with the dub. And now we're talking about you as finally breaking down that door and being a legit contender in the SEC. You don't have a number one receiver. That doesn't mean you need one this year. You can't just rely on explosive plays, though. You can't rely on seeing Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders blast off for 60-yard runs into the end zone for 6 points. You got to be able to have that second punch. It's like a pitcher that's a closer having at least a second deal, because eventually someone's going to catch up with the fastball and send it yak. You got to be able to have that second punch on offense. If you do, things are going to be interesting. But I'll tell you what, the way that the defense played against LSU, for my money, they will be in every single game moving forward, against Oklahoma, against Vanderbilt, against Alabama, against Missouri. They will have a way to be able to potentially get to 8 wins. It does not shock me that South Carolina has been able to put together a promising start. Oklahoma, this is the week where we kind of figure out what is Oklahoma. Week 4 is what I like to call Pretenders Week, because this is where you kind of separate yourself from the we're really good or we just haven't played quality competition. And by the way, I do not buy into the notion of who have you played. It doesn't matter who you played. It matters how you played against them. And for me, Oklahoma has played sloppy. Offensive line has been hindered by injuries. Wide receivers have been hindered by injuries. You haven't been able to establish a run game. Do you know that right now, Jackson Arnold is your leading rusher? That's a problem. And the problem isn't that he's getting quarterback designed runs and his athleticism is standing out. It's like he's running for his life and no receiver is able to get open. So he's got to tuck it and run to keep momentum moving forward. But you're 3-0. Your defense is one of the best in the SEC. And you welcome Josh Heupel home. And to me, this is going to be one of the best games of the SEC for all of 2024. This is a statement game for Oklahoma. When I look at Tennessee, they kind of need this win because of now we get to say, well, who have you played? We played against a top 20 defense that's going to be legit for the rest of the year. But for Oklahoma, you need this win because if you only get to make a first impression once in the SEC, you only get to make a first impression once in a job interview. That handshake is one of the most important things that could solidify you receiving a compensation, receiving a contract, or potentially having to go ahead and fire up the resume once again. You're getting healthy. Your offensive line is adding in some key players. You're getting back a couple wide receivers. Nick Anderson, go back and watch the Alamo Bowl against Arizona. The relationship between him and Jackson Arnold, you can see why this is promising. And so I think that when you go ahead and put this together, it's going to be a closer game than advertised, but you got to be able to make a statement. You don't have to win this game against Tennessee, but if you get blown out, people are going to say you're susceptible to explosive plays. Your defense is a little bit more overrated than we expected. And ultimately, you're going to be paddling upstream with styrofoam pads. LSU. For me, LSU, there's two truths. You won a football game. Garrett Nussmeier will be able to forever say, I was able to come back down 17-0 and deliver a performance. You got a run game. Durham, the freshman, he was phenomenal in this matchup. And in my money, why are we not going to see him get the rock more against a team like USC? Because maybe, just maybe, you win that game and you're sitting at 3-0. You also saw Aaron Alexander step up as a legit number 2 opposite of Kyron Lacey, CJ Daniels, Mason Taylor, Xavion Thomas has been really good. But the penalties are going to be a little questionable. This game, 9 penalties for 75 yards, 2 turnovers. Got to go ahead and call a spade a spade. Also, the offensive line still has a lot of questions. I thought that was going to be a strength going into this year. 2 first-round tackles and an 18-year-old was able to take Emory Jones's lunch meat. And you watch as Will Campbell went toe-to-toe with Kyle Kennard, and Kennard was able to go ahead and get in the backfield and blast number 13. But you found a way to win. That is the key. Great teams that can compete for the highest level of college football, find a way, regardless of the situation, the atmosphere, the timing of the game, the heat, the weather index, what matchups you're in, the level of competition. There was no panic, it felt like. There was certainly cause for concern, but it never felt like LSU was panicking. You got a game against UCLA this week. I don't think this is a trap game in terms of win-loss, but I do think that maybe you won't be able to hit the over. But once you start getting to more conference play, it seems like LSU, teams like Alabama, those are going to be games where if you're down 17-0, you might not be able to come back. So I want to see more progress from what LSU has done. Let's talk about the contenders category. Now, this first team that I'm going to name is a lot like Texas A&M. I'm not ready to go ahead and solidify them as a contender, but they did enough to impress me. For me, that's Missouri. Missouri found a way to play a C-plus game against a top 25 team and win. Sorry, that's what I'm going to go ahead and take away. Thomas Castellanos, really good quarterback. We are severely underrating him at the national perspective. He has been a godsend for Bill O'Brien in year one. And the run defense of Missouri, once again, shut him down. 1.9 yards per attempt. Nobody rushed for longer than a 6-yard carry on Saturday in Faurot Field at Memorial Stadium. You also saw as this offense was able to get 2 turnovers. Here's the problem. You had 2 massive explosive plays, and they came on the both form of touchdowns. Early on in the game, you were able to go ahead and watch as the 67-yard pass to Reed Harris took a 14-3 lead. You also watched late in the game as Kamari Morales was able to get a 39-yard score. So the explosive plays, your front 7 looks really, really, really good. Corey Batoon has been a godsend on sending stunts, on sending blitzes. The replacements for guys like Darius Robinson, for Tyron Hopper have been really good. Corey Flagg looks like the leader of that defense. Your secondary is susceptible to explosive plays. Can you get back to that version that we saw against Murray State, to that version that we saw against Buffalo, that's going to keep you in games? And also, can this offense take that next jump? You have a good ground game. Nobody's going to compare the lightning and thunder that is Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel. Perfect complement for each other, and the quality of play that they have has stood out in the first 3 games. You also have wide receivers that can show you that they are going to be separators. They're going to be dudes. This is one of the most underrated wide receiver cores in all the country. But Brady Cook's got to be able to connect better on the deep ball. I think that Luther Burden kind of calling out his quarterback last week showed you that they know that they're better than advertised. So let's go ahead and see what they do against a Vanderbilt team coming off a loss that's a little injured that might be able to go ahead and set a standard moving into the SEC. Because after this, you got a couple more matchups that are going to be a little bit more intimidating, regardless of where you play. Alabama, Texas A&M, Auburn, South Carolina. I'm not entirely ready to put Missouri in the contenders category. But when you play a C-plus game and you get a top 25 win, I'm going to give you the respect that you deserve. Same thing goes for Alabama. Remember those last 5 minutes that we saw against USF where things started to go their way? Yeah, so let me explain how Saturday went. Kickoff happened, and oh, no, game's over. I don't want to hear from people, but Tyler Van Dyke tore his ACL. Cool story, bro. It didn't matter. Maybe the score would have been 17 points. Maybe the score would have been 21 points. Maybe you would have seen a couple of other touchdowns or field goal opportunities, but Alabama was always going to cover. 5 touchdowns on the day for Jalen Milroe. I think he's firmly planted himself into that Heisman Trophy conversation. You see the explosiveness of the run game. Both Jam Miller and Justice Haynes average over 7 yards per play. You also see what Ryan Williams can do. I'm not going to say that he's a freshman that should be winning the homecoming king because that's a lazy narrative. But here's what I will say. I was talking to people at Alabama at the start of the offseason, and many said that this is a kid that reminds them of Julio Jones in terms of impact. And I'm saying to myself, Julio Jones is a rare specimen. You don't get to compare him to anybody. And I said the probably better comp is Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper set a standard for himself in an offense to help the Crimson Tide win the SEC championship and a national title in 2012. And he went on to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft 3 years later. I could see the same thing for Ryan Williams. Currently, over 285 receiving yards, the number 1 receiver on the team, 19.5 yards per play. But you've also seen Jeremy Bernard step up. You've also seen Kobe Brennan step up. You've seen Kendrick Law have a couple big plays. My only question for Alabama is, as they head into this bye week and they prepare for the matchup of all matchups against Georgia, do you have the ability to control the game with tempo? Because over 80% of their touchdowns have come on plays that were over 20 yards down the field. They're one of the best when it comes to explosive plays. Their secondary still has some question marks. Keon Sabb has been really, really good for this team. I think that when you look at the USC transfer that came on in at cornerback, he's been really promising. You have a guy like Malachi Moore that's kind of the veteran chess piece for Kane Womack. There's a lot to like about Alabama. They're back in the contender category. But can you slow down the clock, milk time, have consistent ability to move the sticks on the ground, and not just trust those 20-yard deep shots down the field that you're going to see every single week? Because if you have that, well, then you become a juggernaut that we're comparing to Texas, we're comparing to Georgia. We're saying you're right back in the conversation. But make no mistake, Alabama, they are simply just built the same way they were. It's like waking up with Groundhog's Day 2, the movie, and instead of Bill Murray playing Phil Connor, now you're seeing Paul Rudd do it. That's Nick Saban moving on into what Kalen DeBoer has become. Let's talk about Ole Miss. Yeah, again, like people say, who have they played? I do not care. I don't, and neither should you. Jackson Dart, in 3 straight weeks, has set a record. In week 1, he became the first quarterback since 2019 when Joe Burrow won the Heisman Trophy. Funny how that stat kind of pans out. To throw for over 300 yards and 5 touchdowns in the first half of a game. The next week, he set an NCAA record for the most completed passes in a single game. And then this week, a school record with the 178 passes in a row without throwing a turnover. And what happened right afterwards? Commentators, don't do the jinx, because if you had a pick, and that ultimately ended his day, but he's averaging over 370 yards per game. The rushing attack, no reason to bring up Quinshon Judkins anymore, because Henry Parrish Jr., he's him. It's the prodigal son returning to Oxford after a 2-year vacation out in Miami. And you got 4 number 1 receivers whenever you want it. You got Caden Prieskorn, you got Trey Harris, you got Jordan Watkins, you easily got Juice Wells, who has been one of the best receivers that we don't talk about in the SEC. And this defense, my God, are you watching the way they play? Here's something funny. How many points has Ole Miss allowed this year? I'll save you the trouble. They haven't allowed a touchdown. 9 points. 9. That's it. They have yet to allow a touchdown. And if they play to that standard going into SEC play, I don't care if it's Georgia Southern. You don't allow a touchdown for 4 weeks. That's something that you have to talk about. So Ole Miss is winning in all 3 phases of the game. Special teams, offensive consistency, a defensive identity. You got to bring them up. Let's talk about Tennessee. Yeah, they belong in this list too. But who have they played, Cole? Not about who they played. It's about how they've looked. And outside of a couple of bad interceptions that are correctable from Nico, they look like a juggernaut. This is a team that can easily win a college football playoff. This is a team that can win the SEC and win it by double digits. They feel like a roster that a few years ago, when you see how Hendon Hooker was able to lead this team into the competition that was the Georgia game, they just didn't have a defensive identity. Well, they do. They had the best defensive line in the SEC for my money. They had the most underrated linebacking core for my money. They have the most underrated linebacker who could be the best in the SEC in Dylan Sampson. They got 5 dudes who can all play wide receiver 1, from Chris Brazzell to Brew McCoy to Dante Thornton to Mike Matthews, who also was one of the more underappreciated receivers in all the recruiting aspect. You also still have good tight end play. So Lance Hurd has been a godsend at left tackle, and Nico's going to get better. The thing is that people are talking about Nico as if he has already arrived. He hasn't even hit the first page of the playbook because they haven't had to use it. This is the week that you're going to see it against Oklahoma, against that defense. And if he balls out, congratulations. That's going to be your Heisman favorite. And well, it should be your Heisman favorite. A lot of people have been asking about this secondary. What about the secondary? If they play up to par against Oklahoma, that narrative's over. I'm sorry. I'm done going ahead and buying into it. That narrative is done. And well, it should be. Because right now, when you look at Tennessee, it's not what are they perfect at. It's what are they bad at. Running? Nope. Passing? Pass defense? Yeah, probably not. Pass rush? Nope. Linebacker? Nope. Special teams? Good God, no. So you're looking at Tennessee. They may not be a perfect team, but they're definitely a damn good team. And if they win this weekend by double digits, they're going to enter the conversation of elite teams. Let's talk about Texas. For my money, this is the one team that I can already just pinpoint put in the college football playoff. They may lose a few games. They might. There's this thing called narratives and clippings that are going to start to get to the heads of players, especially when you look at how they played against UTSA when Quinn Ewers went out and Arch Manning came in. That would work against probably 85% of SEC teams. The way that Arch Manning played on Saturday, it's not against UTSA, it's against anybody. The offense has been phenomenal. You don't need a number 1 receiver when you have 7 dudes that all can take over games in an instant. DeAndre Moore looks awesome. You look at Ryan Wingo, the 5-star. He could absolutely become the next big-time playmaker down on the 40 acres. Isaiah Bond's been good. Silas Bolden in few reps has been impressive. You got a great tight end in Gunnar Helm. You love what you see from Matthew Golden. The run game has been exceptional despite not having a fully healthy Jaden Blue and CJ Baxter. And the defense, let's just call a spade a spade. Johnny Nansen brought in some dudes from Arizona, and they've lived up to the 40 acres culture. And the transfers have been phenomenal for this team. So there is not a flaw for Texas right now, which brings me to, you got to make sure that if you are Steve Sarkisian, keeping the narrative. You're new to the SEC. You have to prove you're right to belong in this conference, because the last thing you want to do is start seeing egos get to your head, and then it leads to a loss against Florida, against Kentucky. And by the way, that's very possible. Texas for years has done this thing called Texasing, where they get a big-time win, and then the next week, they play down to the level of competition. But make no mistake, Quinn Ewers is QB1 when he's fully healthy. That's not a debate. Quinn Ewers is the reason why I think that you can beat Georgia. He's the reason why you can win a national championship. And the difference between him and Arch Manning is Arch can lead you to a college football playoff. Quinn Ewers can win you a college football playoff. So whenever he's healthy, they're going to be fine. Number 3 comes on in. And the good news is you see a very bright future regarding everything that is happening in Austin. And Georgia's number 1. Georgia has this thing called a weak point game where they kind of play down to the competition every single year in the month of September. Go back and look over the last few seasons. It was a close call against South Carolina last year. It went down to the wire against Auburn. A few years ago, Missouri took them down to the wire. Kent State scored like 22 points in that game. And so this is the reality check that Kirby Smart loves and the rest of the college football world hates. Because if he's basically going to say, oh, we're going to do it this way, fine, I'm not playing you. The offensive line does worry me a little bit when it comes to depth. Tate Ratledge had tightrope surgery on his ankle, which means that he could be limited for the Alabama game. The depth on the defensive line is starting to scare me a little bit. You need Michael Williams back there as a pass rusher. And I think that you also see a little bit of question marks when it comes to the depth in the secondary. But from a starting standpoint, they're still the standard of the SEC. Moving forward, this is going to be where somebody has to separate itself. Maybe you don't have as elite of playmakers like Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, but you still have good ones in Colby Young and Dylan Bell and Oscar Delp. You still have quality running backs in Trevor Etienne sorry about that, Branson Robinson and Nate Frazier. So there's a lot to like still about Georgia. One game does not define your season as a wait and see. Even if you lose to Alabama, I still feel like it's not a wait and see. This is a team that controls its own destiny. And by the way, they're going to be in the college football playoff. Death, taxes, and arrival in Athens for what should be a 12-team postseason. But those are my pretenders and contenders going into week 4. Let me know in the comments section down below. Who would you change? What do you like about this list? Where do you think that these teams currently reside and where they should reside? Make sure that you like, rate, review, subscribe. Follow me on the Instagram and at Mr. Cole Thompson on Twitter. Follow us on the social channels at SEC Unfiltered. And check out all of our great work found at SECUnfiltered.com. Until next time, I'm Cole Thompson, folks. Later.